December 4th, 1969. Akua Njeri was 19 years old and sleeping next to her fiancé, the Illinois Black Panther Party chairman, Fred Hampton.
The next thing I remember was someone in our room shaking Chairman Fred. Chairman, wake up, wake up. Plaster was flying off the wall. You could smell the cordite from the gunshot. If you've ever been under gunfire, 5 minutes is 5 hours. To you, it seems like forever. The shooting started back again. Then another voice unfamiliar to me said, "He's good and dead now." I knew they were talking about Chairman Fred.
Fred Hampton was murdered by his government. But before that, he was a leader in a movement practicing a new kind of activism. A movement targeted because of its power to unite people.
Marking 1964 as a historic year in race relations, on July 2nd, President Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act. It was the strongest.
In the 1960s, racial progress in the U.S. was at a turning point. Activists won major civil rights victories, and the era of Jim Crow laws came to an end. But at the end of the decade, there were still deep social and economic gaps for Black people across the country. Black Americans continued to face high poverty, poor housing, and unemployment, and they still had little to no political representation. These disparities and an increase in brutal police violence led to uprisings across the country. Many young Black activists grew frustrated that the changes they'd hoped for hadn't come.
It's just the opposite of being a white man. That's about the best I can abbreviate that for you.
After the police killing of an unarmed Black teen in San Francisco, two activists in Oakland, California, Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, founded what was initially called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Newton had studied law and knew it was legal to carry arms in California as long as they were not concealed. The Panthers began to patrol their communities. As the movement grew, several highly publicized confrontations with police would bring about mainstream awareness of the Black Panther Party. The allegations in these confrontations were serious, but the public accounts of them were typically one-sided and shaped largely by police. Media coverage depicted party members as a caricature of Black militancy.
The Black Panther Party was portrayed as a marauding gang. They say their goal was to kill all the white people.
In reality, the Panthers did call for radical change.
What they were hoping for was a revolution to overthrow the capitalist enterprise.
But what they called revolution might not actually sound so radical today.
Focused on socialism as a way of solving economic needs. They looked to places like Canada, which always had a democratic political system, but the economic system has always been socialism. So they wanted a democratic socialist country here in the United States, which they saw as a more equitable, more humane system.
They released a 10-point plan for broad social reform that called for an end to police brutality and for Black employment, housing, education, and freedom from prison and jails. Chapters began forming across the country. They started to implement social programs, which they called survival programs.
The Panthers would say, put that theory into practice. If you really want to change minds, if you really want to meet the people where they are, you have to give them the services which they need.
The programs included food and clothing drives, free health clinics, and sickle cell disease testing, and were funded largely by volunteers and donations from businesses. One of their biggest programs was a free breakfast for children initiative.
Here we are living in 1966, 67, is the most wealthy nation in the world, and kids were going to school hungry, especially in African American communities. So one of the first community service programs were free breakfast for school children.
And all the children had to do was come.
It was during this time that Akua Njeri, then known as Deborah Johnson, met Fred Hampton.
I was a student at Rice City College, and Chairman Fred had come up to the school to speak, and he said, At the breakfast program, we feeding over 3,000 children a week. We're serious about making power to the people of reality. We're not just sitting up here jaw jabbing and talking shit, you know. We about work. And I say, damn, we serious about this business.
Fred Hampton grew up in Maywood, Illinois, just west of downtown Chicago. He became president of his local NAACP Youth Council in 1967, at 19 years old. Shortly after, he was recruited by a founder of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party.
That you can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail a revolution. Right.
Because of his charismatic skills, he quickly rise to the top of the crop.
Here he is at age 21, building and leading the Illinois chapter Black Panther Party.
Soon after they met, and Jerry and Hampton became a couple.
Anybody that has met him or heard him speak, they say he wasn't bullshit. He was for real.
You got to understand that people have to pay the price for peace. If you dare to struggle, you dare to win. If you dare not to struggle, then goddamn it, you don't deserve to win. Let me say peace to you if you're willing to fight for it.
Chicago in particular was a place where the party's ideals especially resonated. It was then the second largest American city, and due to decades of discriminatory policies, also one of the most segregated. Chicago's mayor at the time, Richard J. Daley, opposed neighborhood integration. And in the 1950s, the city had begun to redevelop certain neighborhoods, pushing low-income residents out and into densely packed, high-rise public housing in already overcrowded neighborhoods. Black people were pushed primarily to the south and west side of Chicago. A large Puerto Rican population was here in Lincoln Park, and poor white people were concentrated here in Uptown. These groups all faced similar problems.
They all had dilapidated schools, they all had dilapidated homes, they were all being drafted into Vietnam. Very few of those communities had health care.
In 1969, Hampton led the Panthers towards an unexpected alliance, a coalition of activists working across racial lines against a corrupt city government that threatened their communities.
We're going to fight racism, not racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity.
What they had in common was their poverty. So they was building a revolution based on class solidarity that transcends race, that they all had the same hell to pay.
Hampton named the group the Rainbow Coalition. It included the Black Panthers, a Puerto Rican group called the Young Lords, and a group called the Young Patriots, made up of largely poor white migrants from Appalachia who had moved to Chicago seeking economic opportunity.
We don't hate the motherfucking white people, we hate the oppressor, whether he be white, black, brown, or yellow. So we got to know that.
I don't mean sing Kumbaya and make a quilt. I'm talking about bringing them together on common things they could unite on. Not everything, but who could say that children do not deserve to have a healthy meal?
If we work with anybody.
Hampton and other Panthers helped the Young Lords and Young Patriots launch their own social programs. They organized protests together. And it was working. Members were traveling across the country to organize Rainbow Coalition chapters.
Particularly where Black Panther chapters were, but also in these rural white communities as well, to bring the revolution to bear. This blows people's minds. These people are not supposed to get along, but here they are operating as brothers of the struggles, as revolutionaries against the capitalist structure. And that was the threat to the state at the local level, but also at the national level.
In 1968, the FBI had sent around this internal memo. It outlined goals to prevent the coalition of militant Black nationalist groups and prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant Black nationalist movement. It wasn't written about Hampton specifically, but by 1969,
Chairman Fred Hampton was the one that fit the bill.
The revolution was in the air. And the ways in which the Panthers was able to transcend those racial lines, especially their charismatic leadership of one like Fred Hampton, they saw him as a greater threat even than Martin Luther King or Malcolm X ever was.
In one FBI memo about the Black Panthers' breakfast program, they claimed their real purpose was to poison minds with anti-white propaganda and indoctrinate youngsters in hate and violence.
The FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, had deemed the Black Panther Party as the #1 threat to the internal security of this country.
The FBI operated a counterintelligence program called COINTELPRO. It was a program that targeted dissident political groups in the U.S. Their methods typically went outside the law.
They were using tactics such as assassination, discrediting false narratives. They were falsely putting people in prison and exile, which were all illegal.
Several Black Panthers were killed or imprisoned, including the party co-founders. In Chicago, the party was also targeted by Mayor Daley and the Chicago police.
Our office was burned down at least 3 times. People would disappear. You never see their bodies again.
Before you go to bed tonight, say I am a revolutionary. Make that the last word. In case you don't wake up, then somebody might believe it and you might, end up in what they call a revolutionary happy hunting grounds.
Hampton, a rising star at just 21 years old, knew he was a target too. He'd been arrested in 1968 for allegedly robbing an ice cream truck and handing out $71 of ice cream. In 1969, he was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. He appealed and was released on bond, but lost the appeal. He'd have to return to prison by December 6th. On December 4th, around 4 a.m., 14 Chicago police officers arrived outside Hampton's apartment on Chicago's west side. Inside, Hampton, Jerry, and 7 other Panthers were asleep.
I was very pregnant, and the first thing I remember was Chairman Fred had fell asleep while talking on the phone. The next thing I remember was someone in our room
started shaking the chair.
Chairman, wake up, the pigs are vamping. And I'm seeing Chairman Fred look up, and then he laid his head back down real slow.
Officers kicked open the door and shot Mark Clark, a visitor from another party chapter. They shot a sleeping 18-year-old named Brenda Harris. Then they shot in the direction of Hampton's bed.
Mattress is just going, you could feel the bullets going into it.
I had moved over on top of Chairman Fred because there was shooting into our mattress. The person that had come into the room kept shouting, stop shooting, we have a pregnant sister in here. Eventually, the shooting stopped.
And Jerry was forced into the kitchen when she heard another voice.
Someone said he's barely alive.
He'll barely make it. I assume they were talking about Chairman Fred. Pig said, he's good and dead now.
As they took me out and jammed a revolver to my stomach as I was handcuffed behind my back, I didn't look towards our bedroom because I didn't know what I would see or how I would respond.
The police fired nearly 100 shots. Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were dead. The 7 surviving Panthers were arrested. And police smiled as they removed Hampton's body from the scene. The Chicago police and the state's attorney's office quickly shaped the narrative to call it a gunfight, a battle, and a shootout.
Officers involved in the raid testified that they were fired on from 4 different rooms in the apartment by shotgun.
And before I could get past the threshold, there were 3 shots fired from the rear bedroom.
They played back a story that you could not even fathom. They gave a fictional account of what happened, again vilifying the Black Panther Party.
I mean, they were firing at police.
Yes, sir. We saw the shots coming out of the 2 bedrooms.
This attack by the Black Panthers on the police clearly demonstrates the true character of the Black Panther Party.
But experts and lawyers hired by the Panthers, along with other journalists, inspected the crime scene. The Panthers even opened the apartment so that anyone could examine it. And a drastically different picture emerged. it was clear that the police had fired unprovoked. Of the nearly 100 shots fired, only one possible shot could have come from a Panther's gun, likely from Mark Clark at the front door. The bullet holes that the police said came from Black Panthers were nail heads. Later, it also emerged that the FBI had assisted Chicago police with the raid. The FBI had an informant within the Black Panther Party named William O'Neill, who had become chief of security and Hampton's bodyguard. O'Neill had provided the FBI with a hand-drawn floor plan of the apartment, which the FBI then gave to Chicago police. And evidence strongly suggests that before the raid, O'Neill had drugged Hampton. In the years after Hampton's assassination, the police and the FBI continued to imprison dozens of party members across the country. The official Black Panther Party would continue to exist until 1982, but membership decreased dramatically, and it would never be the same.
And I hope that each one of you will be able to die in the international proletarian revolutionary struggle, or even be able to live in it. And I think that struggle is going to come. Why don't you live for the people? Why don't you struggle for the people? Why don't you die for the people?
Fred Hampton wanted revolution. Those in power wanted to destroy him and what he stood for. But they weren't totally successful.
Chairman Fred lives. You know what I'm saying? Through the military assault, through the destruction of the party as an organization itself, by the state, the legacy of the party is still here.
Today, the work of Fred Hampton is alive through some of the same programs that marked him as a threat.
Many of the programs that the Panthers created are now staples of our society. We didn't have free breakfast in schools prior to the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program. Those free clinics, almost every major college campus got a free legal aid clinic. The ways in which sickle cell testing is now respected as a disease by the CDC and others. None of that stuff existed before the party. I think that's revolutionary.
The history of the Black Panther Party that's going toe-to-toe with this government will never die. Never die.
Fred Hampton was not just a name. He was a beacon of hope for many, a voice that resonated with the urgency of our struggle for justice and equality. Born in 1948, he emerged as a leader in the civil rights movement and became the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Hampton's activism was not limited to addressing police brutality or advocating for civil rights. He envisioned a broader fight for social justice that encompassed the needs of all marginalized communities. The U.S. government, recognizing the threat that his message posed to the status quo, ultimately took drastic measures to silence him. Hampton's work was transformative. He understood that true change could not be achieved in isolation. It required solidarity among oppressed communities. He was instrumental in building coalitions between various groups, including poor white communities, Latinos, and other marginalized populations. This approach was revolutionary. Hampton's vision of unity among the oppressed scared those in power. They understood that a united front could dismantle the very structures that upheld their dominance. The Black Panther Party's focus on community programs, such as free breakfast programs for children and health clinics, further demonstrated that the Panthers were not just about armed resistance, they were about empowering communities. However, Hampton's efforts did not go unnoticed by the FBI. Under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI viewed the Black Panther Party as a threat to national security. They were particularly concerned about Hampton's charisma and his ability to mobilize people. Hoover famously stated that the Black Panthers were the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. This was not merely rhetoric. It was a declaration of war against a movement that sought to expose the injustices faced by Black people and other marginalized groups in America. The FBI employed various tactics to undermine and destabilize the Black Panther Party, including surveillance, infiltration, and disinformation campaigns. They aimed to create divisions within the party and isolate influential leaders like Hampton. The COINTELPRO operations were designed to disrupt and dismantle civil rights organizations deemed radical. It is within this context that we must understand the brutal actions taken against Fred. On December 4th, 1969, the FBI, in conjunction with the Chicago Police Department, executed a calculated plan that led to Hampton's assassination in his own home. In a pre-dawn raid, heavily armed police stormed the apartment, firing over 90 shots. Hampton was just 21 years old at the time of his death, asleep beside his pregnant partner, Deborah Johnson. The state-sanctioned violence that took his life was an act of terror aimed not only at silencing a leader, but also at instilling fear within the broader movement for social justice. The official narrative attempted to frame the police action as a justified response to a supposed shootout, but the evidence tells a different story. Eyewitness accounts and later investigations revealed that Hampton had been drugged, rendering him unconscious at the time of the raid. The brutality of this act was not merely an isolated incident. It was a continuation of a long history of state violence against Black activists and leaders who dared to challenge the systemic oppression faced by our communities. Hampton's assassination serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which the U.S. government has gone to maintain its grip on power. It exemplifies how those in authority will use violence and intimidation to silence dissent and quash movements that threaten the established order. This is not merely a historical footnote. It is part of an ongoing narrative of oppression that continues to affect our communities today. The impact of Hampton's death was profound. While the government may have aimed to extinguish the flame of his activism, they inadvertently ignited a greater awareness and urgency for social justice among Black communities and allies. His legacy lives on in the hearts of those who continue to fight against systemic racism and inequality. The principles he championed, solidarity, community empowerment, and the fight against injustice, remain relevant today as we confront ongoing struggles for racial and social equity. As we reflect on the assassination of Fred Hampton, we must recognize the importance of honoring his legacy through continued activism and solidarity. His life and death serve as a call to action for us to educate ourselves about the history of state violence and to resist any attempts to silence our voices. We must stand together, uplift one another, and strive to create a world where justice prevails over oppression. The government may have murdered Fred Hampton, but they could not kill the spirit of resistance he embodied. His vision for a just society is a legacy we carry forward, demanding that our voices be heard and our rights be acknowledged. In the fight for justice, we honor his memory by continuing the struggle he passionately engaged in, united in our quest for equality and liberation.